Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. Oh man, we should have started hitting record about 10 minutes ago, but we're going to recap all the awesomeness that Zev and I have already started talking about. I'm so happy that Zev is here today. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation. We'll let our listeners in of where we were, but please introduce yourself and let everyone know just who you are and how you're showing up in the world.
Yeah, it's so fun. First of all, thank you for having me. It's such a perfect time to be on your show specifically because as you know, I'm sure we'll talk about it, I am in my journey forward. So I feel the auspicious nature of being on your show.
Yes.
So, hello to everybody tuning in. Thanks for checking us out. It's fun introducing myself, right? It's like, when you meet someone at a bar and it's like, how quickly do you introduce yourself and reference your work? And so I feel sort of compelled to not do that and just to be a human being. I'm a human being who's been on a path of really what your show is about exploring my truth and being able to support other people and finding their truth and really being like answering the question, what does it mean to be a good human being? Not from what a book or someone else tells you, but from your own inner knowing of what is true for you. What does your own inner goodness look like expressed in the world? And so,
that's such an easy but yet hard question, right? What is our inner goodness and how do we express it? Because there's the ways that we feel like we should express it, the big bad shoulds, and then there's the ways we do express it, and then hopefully we find alignment with those at some point. And you and I, our paths crossed. I was trying to think about it. It was a Wisdom 2.0 conference.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, quite some time, and you were on stage and I am always just excited at those conferences as who am I going to meet? What are the paths? What are the connections that I'm going to find? And, even from afar, you and I have been connected and somewhat in this mindfulness world. And so, just share a little bit about your journey. I know you've gone through a lot of transformation lately, but what would you like to share about what that transformation and journey forward has looked like for you?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And it is fun because I think when I met you, I don't even know if you've had your license yet. Like, I think like so much has evolved. I've watched from afar, but like you got certified, you got your license, you got your first office. And so it's fun to meet you here now at this stage in your journey. So thanks for remembering that. It was really fun meeting you there. So I think for me, it's like, I've just always been really interested in what it means to be a human being and what it means to be in relationship. It's like, I learned a lot of what has helped me in my adult life from when I was probably a kid growing up in a big family. My parents remarried when I was 10. So I had a bunch of stepbrothers and brothers and sisters. And so I just grew up around a lot of people and I watched everybody and I saw a lot of sort of painful things happen. I saw people scream at each other, mistreat each other. I saw people, miss each other and like totally miscommunicate. And I just always was like watching, I just had a chance to really observe. And then I had found a kind of a path of service in my early 20s. I was a special ed teacher. That's really where I got into mindfulness and got into behavior modification and behavior change. And like, what does it take for a human being who's really struggled and been through a lot of trauma? Somebody like often the kids I worked with had behavior challenges is what it was called, or they even like had a label emotionally disturbed, which was just such a strange, moniker to put on someone. But it was always like, how do we soften this person? How do I take somebody who's really aggressively communicating their needs and their experience and find ways to soften them so that their love, their goodness, which can be found in all human beings, could express itself. And so I was sort of on this journey to like, how do you take for lack of a better term, a grumpy, angry, sad, miserable human being and like allow them to soften so that their heart, their truth, their goodness can flow. And that led me on all kinds of fun adventures, from special ed. And then there was a time I was in corporate training, working on behavior change projects with Walmart. And I just kind of had all these fun experiences like that would just give me more access to more people. Ultimately, it's like more people, more like I was never a academic by nature. I never went back to school. I did a little bit of special ed credentialing, but I was never interested in PhD, but I was just like out there in the world learning and watching and tinkering and experimenting. And then I teamed up with the team at Yale University for a little while and worked with them for about 3 or 4 years, teaching emotional intelligence. And that's sort of where I got deep in the notion of like, what are our emotions? how do they impact us? What's the range of emotions? Why are so many people stuck in a very small range? I mean, this is stuff you do with your clients, I'm sure. It's
Yes,
like,
absolutely.
how do people like have more joy? Well, like I started learning like, well, to have more joy, you have to allow in more sadness sometimes. Like you have to stretch in all directions. And so then I was like, got into the emotional intelligence world, but there was something about emotional intelligence that felt like a little like it was like, so what? You knew your emotions. It's like, it was sort of like, I saw people struggling with like, oh, I know I'm happy or I'm sad or I'm frustrated. Or like, but what do I do with it?
Right.
And then I kind of found myself on a medicine journey, and I got involved in a Native American church and started going to pipe ceremonies and praying. And I really found the beginnings of what became my heart's calling around being in community and tapping into something greater than ourselves, to tend to our experience as human beings and to really be vulnerable in our real need for help when things get hard. And
Yeah.
so it's a long way to say how we arrived here. And then once again, life has always been my biggest teacher. It's like every time I think I know something, something happens in my life that just humbles me and opens me. And then I become a student of it. And I try my best to learn as much as I can from that experience so that I can maybe be helpful to someone else who has gone through something similar or something slightly different.
It's such a beautiful telling of that journey. And there was a couple of things that really stood out to me with your early work and with special eds. It makes me think of a mentor that I had growing up who used to say, there is no such thing as a problem child, only a child with a problem. And, to be able to have that viewpoint that you had of how can I just help someone soften? And, from seeing, relationships around you, yeah, softening is hard. There's a lot of reasons people don't want to soften.
Well, it's scary too, especially if you're having feelings and you're vulnerable and you're tender. And so, it's like
Yeah.
I learned, and I started to notice this, whether I was working with the CEO of a company, of a startup, or of parents or a child. Like, it's just like, as soon as you enter into the world of emotional content, like everybody has their defenses, everybody has their way of dealing with it, and it is, I'm sure you cover on the show, right? These are the tools you offer people, like, like, how do you not shrink away when you're starting to feel scared? How do you step towards someone? How do you express yourself? How do you not
Right.
internalize everything? It's like but yet it's so hard. To me, what's so amazing about it is like, I don't care how skilled someone is at any one thing. We all are sort of terrified of speaking our truth,
Yes.
even if it's really small. Even if it's like the smallest
Yes.
thing, it might be the hardest, actually.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I've got some good thoughts around it, but what do you think it really is about what's so hard of speaking our truth?
I mean, I often think about something I read by the spiritual teacher Adyashanti, and I'll paraphrase, but he has this line which says like, the reason we lie is to control things. So if I tell you a half truth and like I kind of give you something and I sugarcoat it or I say it to you in a certain way, then I can kind of control how you'll respond to me. But as soon as I tell you the truth of what's going on, whether like, say like, you had a favorite cookie and I ate it, but then like I saw you and you might get upset with me. So I just say like, oh no, it wasn't me. I didn't eat it. And so you're like, oh, now I can control that you won't be mad at me. But if I say, hey, I just want to be honest with you, I ate the last cookie, you might be like, wait, I told you, you said you wouldn't. And now I feel like you're lying to me and I don't know if I can trust you. And like a whole cascade of things could happen that no human being wants to touch. And so it just becomes more convenient to hide whatever it is. And it's like, I've been learning in my life recently, like we can get into it, like, even the separate, like I'm recently separated and going through divorce from my wife of 17 years. And it's like, even after I shared the most heart-wrenching truths with her, I still found that there was little things, like screen time agreements with our kids where I'm like, I feel a little bit different about it. How scary it is to just come forward and talk about it. And so I'm like in this ongoing process of like, I can't internalize things anymore. It just makes me sick, makes me miserable and stressed out. And I'd rather just like deal with the consequence of my truth.
Yeah.
Every time.
And gosh, there's so much we could go in with that piece. I mean, part of it is so much of how we're socialized too, right? I mean, there's some great work done by a woman named Carol Gilligan. I don't know if you know of her work, that she studied the socialization of girls. And what she found in her research, that when girls were asked, like, how do you feel or what are you thinking? That by age 12, girls knew how to respond in such a way to say, do you want to know how I feel? Or do you want to know how I really feel? Because we learned from a young age, I can tell you how I feel, but I'm not really allowed to tell you how I really feel, because then I might be perceived as not nice or sweet or kind if I tell you my deep, dark truth. And so we fear rejection, right? You know,
Totally.
or boys who learn by age 5 their socialization of don't express emotion, right? This is so much of what my fiance John's work is around, and what he, you know, is doing work within the man box culture of keeping boys prevented, you know, in their socialization growing up from expressing their true self, and being ridiculed for emotion. And as you know, in your research, and emotion is universal. There's no such thing as a good or a bad emotion. I just say they're all natural emotions. And yet it's so hard to be vulnerable.
It's so hard. And one of the things I've been really working on, it's like, it's just this notion of like, it's actually our life will be less complicated if we actually just felt our feelings, had our thoughts, and just shared that, you know, like they're not like what I've noticed in people is that people have feelings and then thoughts. And then because they're so scared of just sharing the feeling and the thought, that they then conjure up like an attack mechanism or a passive aggressive comment or something that then explodes a dynamic between people. And this happens in the corporate world all the time, but also happens amongst family and kids. Like nobody is really skilled at just being like, I feel sad. And I had this thought that you wouldn't want to hang out with me later because you were hanging out with your boyfriend or your other kid or whatever. It's like, just like a simple feeling and thought to allow the other person to go, oh, that's really sweet. No, that's not that way at all. Or I don't, that's versus oftentimes people will take that and be like, well, you don't want to hang out with me anyways, or you're always busy and you don't care about me or whatever the thing
some
we
defense.
Say.
Yeah.
And we attack and then everything gets worse. And so I just have this theory that I've been playing with, which is like, I think our lives will be less complicated if we just told the truth.
Yeah.
Even if people wanted to leave us, even if relationships ended, even if we got fired or jobs, it's just like, it'll just be, it seems like it will be more complicated, but I actually think it's more complicated walking around feeling an internalized grief all the time without expressing it. Like something wants to happen. Let it happen.
Oh, yes. You know, when I started dating John, I played this little game with myself. I called it a game, so it was easier to have less attachment to it. You know, it wasn't like a mind fuck of a game of, you know, I'm not going to, you know, play dating games per se, but I had to refer to it as a game in my mind to have an easier time engaging in this new pattern, which was exactly what you're saying. I said to myself, let me just see what happens if I actually say how I feel. Let me just see, because I had been in a habit of learning it was safer and easier to not say what I felt. It was the perception that it was safer and easier in a previous relationship that had been the majority of my life. I was married to my high school sweetheart, and so I had no other experience to know the difference.
Wow.
And after 23 years, I was like, you know, I've just got to step into, let me just say what I feel. And if I'm, quote, rejected for that, well, then you know what? Better to know that now. This is not my person, because I don't want to be living a life in which I am holding back my authentic self for fear that you may not like me, for fear that that might hurt you, for fear that it might make us, you know, God forbid, we should be uncomfortable.
Super useful data, right? Like telling someone the truth and watching how they respond is to me one of the coolest things, because it's like, it's a leap of faith. They might totally disconnect from you. They may not want to talk to you anymore. And it's like, wow, but you know what I've been finding? It's freedom. It's actually the freedom we're all after. It's just like truth telling. And to your point, for people listening who are in relationships, like I think it's so like beautiful and tender and loving to go, you know, I've noticed I was feeling a little jealous because you were going out with so-and-so, even though I know you're friends and there's nothing to worry about, or like you're with your ex-wife or husband, or you're with a coworker. I felt a little jealous, and I just wanted to tell you. Yeah. It's like, it's so sweet, actually. The other person feels so like just connected and important and special in that, in hearing that, versus the manic things we do when we feel jealous and the crazy things human beings will do to each other. Like, let me see all your text messages, or what are you doing right now? Or what are you doing later? It's like we could all make our lives less complicated, I think, if we just could share it. And I love that you got a chance to do that. Like, I think I've been noticing too, from being with my new partner, that like women especially, it seems like, have really suffered for a long time around not feeling safe to share their feelings. I've noticed that a new insight I learned, like I didn't realize that for women, there's this pattern. You tell me if you experience this, but like, or you hear it from your clients, but like that there's a way in which a woman might share their feelings that are so uncomfortable for the man to receive, that the man then goes on his own emotional experience that totally leaves the woman's emotional experience in the dust. And so now the woman's
Oh, yes.
trying to keep up to now tend to their upset man because
Oh,
and
yes.
so then it's just not safe. I mean, it's weird even reporting about it, but like,
No,
this is common, right?
But you know, it is so common. And here's where I will vulnerably share, you know, John's got a PhD in educational psychology. He's had a
so
private
great, by the way.
practice.
His work is
He is
so
awesome.
good. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, for that. I agree.
Please tell him I say hi. He's so great.
I will. And yet, you know, here's like the big, you know, real reality of it all. Even though he teaches this stuff, damn it, we both still get stuck in human dynamics. And so I want to be vulnerable and saying, we both teach this. We both know the research. We both know the tools. And yet, damn it, we're still human. And we can get stuck in this pursuer withdrawal dynamic. And so part of it is to be able to understand, here is a dynamic that we have cultivated these patterns, likely out of a sense of protection from some earlier wounded place, childhood usually, maybe previous relationship, right? And when we can bring awareness with compassion to that, we're in this dance. It's the dance that, as the relational therapist Terry Real says, is, oh gosh, it's such a good, like, you know, he says relationships are a constant dance of repair. Oh, and I'm messing up the quote. It's kind of like we're in this constant dance of disconnect and repair, right? We are always in somewhat of this dance, which I completely butchered his beautiful quote around it. But I've noticed that what you just named with John and I, in which, you know, he will begin to withdraw a little bit out of self-protection, and I want to rescue that. And so then I begin to then abandon myself out of the rescuer because I don't want him to be uncomfortable, but now I'm uncomfortable because I've abandoned my own emotions. And so it's been great wisdom for us to learn, even though we know this intuitively, and we also know it, you know, intellectually, it's not even easy to put into practice, but to name in the moment, we can name, I see you beginning to withdraw. I understand you're in self-protection mode. And I also don't need to rescue that. I'm okay with you being uncomfortable. That's your work. And I'm here to support you in your work, but I can't do your work for you. And I don't want to abandon myself in my work.
Totally. I like to think of it as like, we're all trying to be cool all the time. And then it's like one person's uncool, and it works if one person's uncool and in their feelings and the other person's cool, it works. But then like when we're both uncool, what happens? You know, like when we both are stripped down and just sort of like vulnerable and having feelings. But I've been finding that like sometimes I need redirection. Sometimes I need my partner to just say like, hey, I'm just needing to be seen. I'm sharing my experience. Then I'm like, oh, I snap out of it. And I'm like, oh, I actually don't have to feel anything right now. I'm just supposed to be there and like be present.
Just observe it.
Yeah. Like and it helps me snap out of like, you know, and I've also learned like, oh, it's not a time for me to say anything. It's not a time for me to retort or to give a reason why. Like it's too late at that point. Because if somebody's having an emotional experience based on something I did or said or whatever, when the sharing of it is not the time for the reason why or the, oh my God, but you should know that like that. It's like, I'm learning that's just like, how do I do less? It's actually relaxing. I think that if most men and some women too, but like just did less.
Yeah.
A lot of good things that happen, you know, simplify. It's like we complicate, because then that's when things get really messy, right? Most fights start because someone starts to share something really vulnerable. The other person doesn't receive it well and like escalates it level 2. And now the person who was vulnerable first gets pissed because they're like, wait, I shared something tender and now I'm being attacked. It's like, F you. And then it's just like fireworks.
Yeah.
You know?
Isn't that such the dynamic? But I think even if it's not fireworks and explosive and fighting, it can happen in very subtle ways. And, you know, what often happens is it leads to disconnection. And then ultimately, what do we learn? It's not safe for me to share. So ultimately, I learn, you know what, if I'm going to be rejected or put down or dismissed on my emotional vulnerability, I'm going to learn, oh, don't do that again.
Totally. And one thing I've been really noticing is like, being a stand for like, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't feel safe to share. So like, if I have to do work to make that, if I have to like create more space for her, if I have to find ways to resource myself so I can show up for those moments. It's like, I'm so committed to knowing I don't want to be in that kind of dynamic that when it shows up, even if it happens for a little bit, I'm just like, okay, like, how do I show up for that? How do I, cause it just sounds terrible. Like to be, you know, repeating a pattern Because I'm a man, I've been conditioned too by this culture, right? Like you were talking about John's work. It's like, so I'm just aware that like, oh, men will take up more space in the realm, especially emotional men too, can become very emotionally grabby of space and time. And then the women are like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I have a crying man. It's kind of sweet at first. And then eventually it's like, you're crying all the time, man. And like, I never get
Mm-hmm.
to cry and be held. Or it's like, and so
Yeah.
how is there balance in that? How do we show up for that? But yeah, it's
I think
definitely a
it's a
journey.
great I think it's a great question in those moments for those of you guys listening right now and who are, like probably their soul is screaming like, yes, how do I enact this? Like I think some tangible tools, and I'd love to hear what you would say as something really tangible as a takeaway someone could have in these moments, because I think we're identifying a very ubiquitous relational dynamic, right? One of my favorite things is to always lead with curiosity and compassion. I
Mhm.
think if we're leading with curiosity and compassion, it can diffuse that reactivity or defensiveness. But the other piece is, John and I will often say to each other, if one of us is having a hard time, one will say, how can I best support you right now? And oftentimes the answer is you asking the question, was support enough? Like that's just holding the container. And when we can realize we don't have to fix our partners, solve our partners, that we can have trust in their own process, and that by being a compassionate presence, that's often enough. I mean, what would you say if people saying, what do I do in those moments?
Yeah. Well, I actually have some tools for the reverse, for the person who's scared to share. So like, that's the question for, so say you're already having an emotional experience and I can see that and I come up and say, how can I support you? But I think
Right.
like the hardest thing people struggle with is how do you open up? How do you
Yeah.
like think about like, there's all these like tools out there, like conversation starters and icebreakers in corporate, but like, there isn't
Yeah.
really a great way to be like, so I have something like I need to share that could be impact you and I'm scared. Like it just doesn't exist. That's I think also why it's so awkward. We don't have rituals in our culture for like, we're going to do the awkward thing where I share some feelings. So everybody gather around and get the pillows and like, it doesn't exist. So it's like, we're all co-creating it. And I think one thing I've noticed is really helpful for me is to start by saying, hey, like I need to share something. And it's really hard for me. Like what this is, I'm scared. Literally, I'm scared to share it. And I've noticed that
Mm,
sort of like softens anybody who's about to hear whatever I said, because they go, okay. They do also have an oh shit moment of like what's about to be said. Don't get me wrong. So
sure.
it levels up the playing field of like, please like put your phone away. Like I'm like, I'm uncomfortable to share this. And so I do believe in like step one of just setting the container, like you mentioned before, that like this is big for me, and like, and then making any requests. Like I'm going to share something and I just ask that you take it in. I ask you to like, just like let me
Yes.
have a moment to express it. And then I would love to talk about it. I would love to, when I'm done, I'd love to hear how it impacts you or your thoughts, and just create like, I'm a big fan of setting some structure for conversations. I think they're really
Mm-hmm.
helpful. I think like, I had a conversation with my older sister recently that was that potentially heated. And I said, like, I literally was like, hey, I'm not interested in debating or fighting, but I'm open to hearing how you feel and your experience. And I just asked that like, you go first. And then when you're complete, I'll go next. And then I went and she started to interrupt me and I reminded her, I was like, hey, remember we had like an agreement. And so that's one tool, is just like, but I believe in that, like the first layer of vulnerability is acknowledging that it's vulnerable to just say whatever you're about to say is helpful.
Yes.
It's like, I'm scared to say how I feel right now. And I need to tell you because I love you. And I can't be in a relationship where I don't share this stuff.
Yeah. It's such beautiful intentions. And I can imagine some people listening, because I've had a lot of clients in this realm who are on board with that and their partners are not, or people who are, whether it's in relational dynamics of, more vulnerable communication, holding that compassionate, non-reactive container, or whether it's even just adopting a spiritual path. And, people will often say to me, well, Jory, what do I do if, I really want to start practicing these tools of mindfulness and my partner's not interested? And I'm like, I got divorced. I don't really know what to tell you. And I
Totally.
joke, right?
But
But
it's
maybe that's
true.
sometimes
It's
what it
true.
is,
It's true.
you
Like if your
know?
partner doesn't want to work on this stuff with you and so like all you can do is keep committing to your path. And then through that, you'll find out what's there with you and your partner. It will become a wedge at some point. Like it's just impossible not. People grow apart. But the other thing I want to say too is like, I think media matters. Like I think sometimes I suggest like, writing a letter to somebody, handing it
Mhm.
to them while you're sitting there. Like I'm all about like, just like breaking up the pattern. So if a person listening right now has like chronically like said to their husband or their wife, like, hey, I want to talk. And they're just like, oh, I don't have time for your feelings. You're so needy. Leave me alone. Like, and the person just feels rejected. I'm like, get creative, write a note, do it in an email. Like, it's just like, because if you don't express yourself, here's my perspective. It's like, it's a miserable life. Nobody is happy that I've met yet who's holding everything in it. I have yet to meet the happy internalizing human. Like it's just like, it's not the way. It's just like, I literally was with my partner yesterday and she had like some business thing come up and she started to do this into like just talking to me about it. And I go, what if you just expressed it to the person immediately and internalized none of this and see what happens? And by the end of like 20 minutes, they realized they weren't going to keep working together and it was clean. And yes, then she went through the grief of the experience, but like, it was clean. It was just like, we're all just internalizing way more. And if you look at the research of stress related disorders, stomach illnesses, back pain, neck pain, headaches, rashes, there's so many body ailments that I truly believe come from internalization and just like chronic worry about things we're not doing.
We are holding it in and it's gonna show up somewhere.
Yeah. And that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, what were you going to say there?
I was just going to say that's what happened to me. And like with my marriage, for example, it's like I was just internalizing this painful truth that I didn't know what to do with. And so it wasn't until I just cracked and just started sharing honestly with my partner where I was at and what I was feeling and she could witness it that things started to move. Like I was miserable and I felt like I was living a double life where I was like happy family guy, but underneath somewhat miserable, and it wasn't like I knew right away that separation was the answer. I thought maybe we could work on it. I thought all the things, but ultimately it was through my own self-expression of what I was internalizing that my life opened up and it became clear what to do for both of us, not just for me. And like, I didn't, internalizing, especially for people listening, it's like, I don't even blame people anymore now that I've gone through it too, especially around separation. It's like, I get why people cheat. I get why people do stupid stuff because they're just internalizing it all and you need relief. If you internalize, like you look at addiction and drinking, like I drank for many years and I've been 7 years without alcohol, but I was everything was internalized. So I was in pain. And so what do you do with internalized pain? You need a remedy. It's just like, I don't even fault anybody. It's like, you need that cupcake or that cookie or that cannabis or the wine or and even the worst stuff, it's like,
sure.
But the remedy, to just see what happens when we let it loose, and like find out how to do that.
Well, and it's such a courageous act. And many people would say, well, I'm not sure I could do that. Right. And the thing I was going to say earlier is still, super relevant now. They'll say, well, that's really hard. That'd make me really uncomfortable.
The hardest thing in the entire world, the hardest thing.
It is. And yet what they are not really acknowledging is all that internalization and not being yourself, that's actually harder. Like you're saying you're afraid to do the hard thing when not living your truth already is the hard thing. So one of them gives you a path to freedom. One of them keeps you more stuck. So which heart are you going to choose?
Well, and it's so funny listening to you say that out loud when you start talking about hard stuff. And I think about our culture, right? We live in a culture of like, you have to do hard things, and like we tell our kids, like you have to work hard and like hard is actually like an honorable thing to do. Hard work, you got to persevere. You're an entrepreneur, you work at a company, like hard work. And it's like, so then all of a sudden we present something that's hard, which is truth telling, and we shut down. We're like, that's too hard. And it's like, no, it's actually the place to apply yourself with all your might and force. And it is really hard. I think people need more support than they realized. I did. Like I needed a lot of support to just start to open my heart and my mouth at the same time to the person. This is the part that makes me so sad. It's like, if we truly love the person, coworker, co-founder, husband, wife, child, mom, dad, but then why wouldn't we do the hard thing to really open our heart to them? And it's counterintuitive to me. And I totally get how hard it is. Like I am not like you're, it's a good point. Anyone listening who's like, that's insane, I'm not telling my husband or wife what I'm actually feeling or thinking, is making a really big choice, and their quality of life will be represented by it. And the last thing I want to say is like, the other myth about things being hard is that like, we have these notions of like, if you work hard, there's something great at the other end of it. You work hard on your business, it'll be successful, you'll make money. So the same thing is about telling truths. It's like, it's that hard, but it's that good on the other side. Whatever it is, whatever comes out of it, whether you're closer to the person or you're more distant, it's going to be better. then to your point, the
Yeah.
internalizing is so distressing.
It is. And, and going through a divorce is, I did about 7 years ago, one of the hardest things ever. And I've often joked that I think everybody, even if you're in a happy marriage, I think everybody in their 40s should go through a divorce. You can choose to remarry the same partner. And I'm talking an energetic divorce, right? I'm not saying like legally go through all this, but hear me out. Because there's nothing like a divorce to crack you open, to get you to become fully aligned in your values and what's most important and how you want to be living your life. And if you've got children, how you want to role model relationship, how you want to role model those values. And if you choose to end up with the same partner because everything aligns, great. But the work of being cracked open to say, how can I live consciously and intentionally for the next 40 years, right? Because we've all made decisions in our early 20s that we had no idea who we were. And we think the hard work is to stick it out and that's going to role model healthy relationship. And it's like, well, isn't maybe questioning and being curious and growing along the way what we really want to be role modeling, but it's not what society purports, right? But everyone I know who's divorced, as painful as it is, there's such deep wisdom through that pain that we can learn. And, I'm being facetious a bit. And I think there's such value in enacting our own inner growth in a way that if we just are on the trajectory, we never even question.
Totally. And I also think like human beings are made for hard things. Like I have yet to meet a human being who hasn't been through something that has broke their heart into a million pieces. It's like I refer to it as the unimaginable. And I think it'd be fair for people listening, like partly where I got the courage to show up for my own life was watching my ex-wife almost die 3 years ago. So I was like at her deathbed and they didn't think she would make it. And we had 2 daughters. And so it was like, for me, it was like that was, if we'd done this show 3 years ago, I would have just talked about that the whole time. But it really was the beginning of me really understanding what life meant to me and valuing watching someone I cared so much about almost leave also awakened me to the fact that I am alive and that whatever's in me is in me. If we're going to even talk about the notion of God or some greater spirit or something, it's like, I don't know that it is anything other than what is inside of ourselves. It's like, so attending to that truth to me is the wisdom of what death has really taught me, through other family members who have passed suddenly. Like I've witnessed death enough to recognize that I'm alive. And if I'm alive, I ought to listen to the impulses and the intuitive direction that my life wants to go in above all else, like with blind faith. Cause what else is faith? If like my faith is in our culture, well, that seems silly because our culture seems pretty sick. So maybe, just maybe, all of us listening to our truth, even if it feels scary or uncomfortable, as long as it's, within some paradigm of safety. I'm not saying if your truth is to hurt someone, I wouldn't encourage following that. So I'm not being flippant about it. But if your truth is to change something in your life, to change a relationship, to move somewhere, to quit a job, all the things that your show probably touches on in the journey forward, it's like, then maybe we should commit and go, and be like water and just like go and don't hesitate. Don't think too much. Like trust and go. And it's like, sure, it'll be hard. I think anybody who's ever quit a job, left a relationship, moved locations would say it's super hard and scary and there's a cathartic breaking and opening, but it always is sort of like this joyous adventure. It's like, and one last thing I'll say about journeying forward is like, our ancestors, the Jewish people, I think we're both Jewish, right? So like, they were brave. They traveled from one country to the other. They came to this country with nothing. They had they had maybe a bag with some bread and they lived on it across a boat. And so like, I only say this to say we're adventurous people. All of us are kind of from global travelers. And so we're not having to go from here to some foreign land, but the foreign land is just shifting our life. Like getting out of a marriage is like traveling from Europe to the US in 1900. In my opinion, it's got to be that scary.
Well, and that's, I think, what prevents people from living their inner truth is the unknown feels unbearably scary. And that was me for a super long time, in which I was choosing to stay stuck because it was the perception that it was better, because it was easier, because it was known. And then when I had the mindset shift to say, wait a second, the unknown is where possibility resides. And that's awesome because I get to create that consciously and intentionally with who I am at this moment in my life. Like that's a beautiful gift. And if you can do that within the confines of what your life was like for the past 20 years, great. And not all of us have that straight, narrow path, that is always going to stay in one direction.
Totally.
Right?
And
We
I think,
have the path that's all twisted and turned, and I think there's
totally. And
beauty in that.
I think I saw Dr. Shafali posted the other day. I love her because she's so like, she's always poking at people, like I love her style, and especially works with so many parents. But she was just saying, like, don't marry for love, marry for growth. And I thought that was like so true. It's like, because of course most people love their exes as long as you're like amicable and sweet. But it's like at some point the container might not be the growth engine anymore for a person. And so like that would be the reason to move on. Maybe a job is no longer where you're growing. So like just keep growing and like let your truth about your own growth guide you. And yes, it's scary. Going off to college is scary for young people, but they go because they're like, I'm going to grow. They just have this sense of growth and adventure and wonder that we sort of lose as we get older. We start to orient to comfort. And so, I think the real bravery
I love
is
that.
stretching.
So, I love that so much. And, when I'm doing work with couples and, oftentimes people will ask, well, how do I know if I should stay with this partner? And usually it comes back to growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Totally.
not everyone is willing to grow. Not everyone has that desire or to do the work or to try new things. And if you've got a partner who is unwilling to look at that, that's some just good information to have. It doesn't mean you have to not be with that partner. It's just really good information to have. And I'll often say to people, look, I don't know what anybody should do. I'm not here to tell anyone, what's right or wrong for them. And I encourage just gathering information.
Totally. And I think it's also fair. Like as I went through my separation, like I realized like I had a bias in this world, which is like my parents got divorced when I was like 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
So like I didn't grow up with the sense that marriages were forever and that like I knew that wasn't true because I was born into it. So it's like I think that like I've gotten some flack from people who are like marriage and it's like, this lifelong commitment and like, the only good marriage is one where someone dies is sort of what I started to notice. And I was like, oh wait, like I don't even really believe that anyways, and I do feel like I can still honor my commitment to my, my first wife and my ex-wife or whatever we're calling her. I like to say I'm the mother of my children, it's like the highest honor term. But it's like, I still think I can abide by that commitment to be, a good friend, to be there to support her as best I can, to, to make sure she's on her path of highest good and like to honor what we set out to do versus like, I think what saddens me is because people have struggled relationally that there is a disregard culture of like divorce is final. Don't talk to me. I can't talk to you. And sometimes that's what's best because people are so at odds and I get it. But I do think there's this new model possible for the human being, which is like, oh, it's not working anymore or it's not for us anymore. I love you. I'll let you go. Let's stay friends. Like let's integrate into your new family structures. And I don't know. I just have a dream that things could be different, as a child of divorce.
Well, I have to say, Zev, I'm very much living a lot of that, what you just described. I was with my ex-husband since I was 13 years old and I didn't want him out of my life. I just didn't want to be married anymore to him. And we have role modeled what that divorce can actually look like in a variety of ways. We've traveled together a handful of times as a family of 4. After our divorce. And even 2 years ago, we went to Israel for 2 weeks with our synagogue when my daughter was bat mitzvahed there, and we spent a weekend in Rome, and John was not there with us. And that was really hard on John. And this was the dynamic. And, it's just 3 nights ago, my ex was over for dinner, just having dinner with us. And at the same time, he has said to me on multiple occasions, I'm so grateful you found John. He's exactly what you said you always wanted. And that just isn't me. And sure, there were moments of anger and disconnect. And at the end of the day, you know what? I'm role modeling to my children that divorce does not mean the end of the world, that there's a way that we can have great love and respect for our history and for our children. And, for what now can be extended relational people in our lives. That is not just this confine of here one day, gone the next.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. Cause I'm definitely trying to endeavor to do the same. And, Megan and I, we had this funny, we're trying to meet weekly to talk about the kids. And I was like, oh, this is our co-parenting meeting. And she just looked at me and was like, she's like, why is it co-parenting? Like, why aren't we still just parents?
Parenting,
And I was like,
yeah.
And I was like, oh, interesting. She's like, shouldn't it be co-parenting the whole time? Like, not like when you get to, we just had this funny, like, you know, because it's a new thing and we were like, oh, we're just still parents. And we just were sat and had lunch and like, we have dinner together. So thank you for just like modeling, like you said, like it's helpful for me to hear that this many years later for you, you're still doing what we're endeavoring to try to do, which is, you know, it's becoming more normal. I know more and more people who have separated and are still friends and stay family connected for the kids, but for themselves too. It's so sweet. Like you said, I've known Megan since I was 20 years old, 21.
Yeah.
So it's like, I have no interest in her not being in my life. She's amazing. Like,
yeah. And it takes, you know, beyond just the two people, you know, great trust in future partners, right? To kind of quote, allow it to happen. And when I first started dating John, I was very clear on two things, aside from I'm going to speak my truth and see how that goes. Was one, I have come too far in my own journey to lose what I've gained. And so I'm going to continue this path of my own growth and my independence. And I'm afraid of losing that. So if I feel squashed or over enmeshed, it's not going to feel that this is the right relationship for me. But the second truth was, this is what my divorce looks like. And to be partnered with me is to accept this is my divorce, and that's not going to waver. You know, and so when it came up around some of the challenges of traveling with my ex, it was like, hey, fair warning, I let you know 5 years ago, this is my divorce. And it's not typical. It's not normal for what most people are like. There's zero threat there. And, you know, it can be hard and still greatly respect and honor. This is who I am. I'm not apologizing for that. And it's been, you know, at times challenging. And then on the flip side, as you and I were chatting for a few minutes, John and I, we've been engaged for almost 2 years, and we also are forming our own way of expectations around engagement and partnership. We still don't live together. We have not moved in and blended our teenage girls. And so I think all of it is an example of, we all get to create our own path of what these relationships look like. And there's no one should, there's no one right way. And yeah, you've got to have respect of the most immediate people on the board, right? Our children and each other, and everyone else. If they have a problem with it, that's likely a reflection of their own insecurity somewhere, and that's not my work.
Well, and it's so interesting. Well, one, I just want to thank you for sharing your truth around your dynamic and your beautiful partnership with John and how you're doing it your way. And it's just like, you know, there's no doubt, like because I'm in my own moment of that. It's like, there's the judgment field of people. Oftentimes it seems like family, I've noticed, seems to take it all a little bit more like, what's going on there? And why aren't you this? And like, are you getting married? And like, or why are you even with somebody? Or it's too soon. And then it's like, I've noticed that like sharing things more publicly, like, you know, Facebook community, social media, like everyone so celebrates our truth. It's this interesting dynamic, you know, where like the truth, like you could tell me your unique life experience and I'm going to show up with just love and curiosity and go, that's amazing. That's how you're doing it. And then people really close to us are like, what's going on? Why are you doing that? I'm worried about you too. Are you okay? Is this normal? You know, and it's like,
you know, do you know what I usually think when that comes up is, wow, this has nothing to do with me.
It's the truth.
Right. This is their own insecurity about perhaps their limiting ways of looking at things. And so, you know, I can hold space for, yeah, that's okay if that makes you uncomfortable, but this really isn't about me.
Totally. That's really good. And I've noticed, like, I think you saw it. I posted a video last week on social media that was about my story. I just felt like I needed to express myself. I've been often cryptic online when it comes to my relationship. And even when Megan was sick, I didn't really, I shared like mystical poetry, but I didn't really share like what was going on, and people would be so annoyed and like, can we just get a medical update? And I'd be like, not really. It's not really your business. Like, but so I shared this really, you know, just my story. It was kind of just the facts, you know, I didn't really, but it felt important for me, but I didn't expect one, how much some people would like really appreciate it. Like the fact that I shared something so private and vulnerable was helpful to many people, but I also didn't expect how concerning it would be to some family members that they're like, I can't believe you shared that online. I can't believe our family sees it. I can't believe that. What about you, your children? What about your ex-wife? Like everyone was just so concerned about what I had done, but I just wanted to share it to say, and I imagine for you too, as you share things on your podcast, it's like, that's just the culture again, trying to keep me from expressing myself. Like nowhere is there any rule on this planet that says, especially when it comes to social media, let's be real, there's no Bible for that. It's like, it's just like, use it as you want. Like if you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. But I just think like, it's another reason why it's so hard for people to tell their truth, even because it's just like everyone's afraid of the judgment field. Most people don't want to be judged by the people they love, by their friends, their community. And so we hide.
It, reminds me of a quote. I don't know if you've seen Brene Brown's Netflix special, A Call to Courage. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's a brilliant hour and 15-minute talk she gives on Netflix that came out about 2 or 3 years ago. But one of the lines that always really, really resonated with me that she says is, we all want to be loved, and yet we're afraid to be seen. Right. Totally. And it's that, and, in all of her work around vulnerability and courage, right? That's what it kind of comes down to, is we want this acceptance, and yet we're afraid to be vulnerable because we're afraid of the rejection. And if you really see me, will you still choose to love me? Will you still choose to accept me? Will you just stay in judgment? And will I have the wisdom to see your judgment perhaps as a projection of you and not really about me? Right.
Totally. And I also want to just share, like, from my experience and really from my own life, it's like anything I don't share or express locks down my whole system. That's just me. So like everyone's different, but if we think about our truth as also an extension of our gifts. And so if I don't feel safe to express myself, then what else am I not expressing? What else am I not putting out in the world? What program that I want to teach am I going to be too afraid to put out? Because it's the same thing. It's all just being afraid of what's in us, putting it out in the world. So whether it's a feeling to a friend or a family member, or it's a new business idea, it all really can be summed up in our willingness to express ourselves, regardless of how people receive it, whether they judge us or not, whether they love us, like you said, like Brene Brown said. I think the stakes are really high. I actually think the stakes are higher than people realize around. That's too scary. Like if you're listening to this and go, this whole conversation freaks me out and I want to run for the hills, pay attention to that. That's gold.
That's good information to have.
Totally.
Right there.
That's gold. Like you just found a gold mine. And if you could somehow, with the help of Jory or myself or whoever else you find in the world, like commit yourself to that scary truth, your life will open up in ways you could never imagine. And I will honestly call it a miracle, because you'll go from A to Q wherever you go, and you'll never have imagined it. Like you just like, for as much time as I spent internalizing, when I actually moved into my own place, I was like, wow, what a miracle. How did I end up here? Like I put so much energy to make it happen, but it was all a miracle. But like, I think it's not rational. I think people are like, I think you said it before the show started, like we're so linear. I tell my truth and I do this and then no, it's not. It's like you tell your truth and then an adventure happens and you end up somewhere, and it's often more beautiful than you could ever imagine.
I mean, could you imagine if someone were to say to you, hey, in 5 years from right now, you'd be here?
No.
What would you have said to that person 5 years ago?
I would say, I don't think that's possible. I don't think that there's no way out of this situation is what I would say. There's no good way that I could live into this truth. And it really did take me that long. For people listening, it's like the first time I talked to my partner or my wife at the time about these feelings was probably like 6 years ago. It took me 6 years to kind of like get myself to the point. And like she almost died in those 6 years. I nursed her back to health. I took care of her. I took care of our whole family. Like I showed up, and then through the journey and the adventure of continuing to show up for the truth of the moment, like we talked about separating before COVID, and I was actually on my way to Brazil for a 21-day pilgrimage, and COVID hit. Like I already had my plane tickets, and the truth of the moment was, this is not the time for anything other than stay together as a family, keep everyone safe, the kids, her, me. Yeah. And like we paused everything. We had a sweet year. It actually created a nice softening to them when COVID sort of broke for a moment. It was like, okay, like it's time. Yeah. And so yeah.
Tell me about your journey. I know you recently have taken on a different name or an additional meaning of your name. Talk about that, because I think our names are so important. I've gone through name change myself. So what has been your journey with that?
Well, so like my middle name's Zev. So my name at birth was Aaron Zev Schiller. And Zev means wolf in Hebrew. Wolf is like sort of I don't even like to call it my spirit animal. It's just like a moniker almost. Like I have wolf tattoos, and the wolf has just always been a kind of a symbol of pack and family and how we come together. And so in this new life, it turned out that my new partner, Tara, had changed her name along the night. As I was like hanging out with her more, I was like, it's so fun. Like you just changed your name. And she was kind of like, it was like a new life had started. And so she picked a new name for herself. And as we started talking, it just became clear that and I used to write a lot of like mystical poetry and sort of like, stuff that it felt like more like channeled wisdom and medicine stuff. And I'd always sign it Aaron Zev. Like when I included Zev it was sort of my spirit self, my true self had Zev in it always. And then I was like, just playing with it. And then I once said, I was like, oh, I guess I've always been fun to go by Zev. And then she just picked up on it immediately and was like, you're Zev. And I was like, no. And I just kind of resisted for a while. And then I just sort of like, I started to realize it felt fun, like purely fun to have a new name. And I loved when I finally committed to it. And it was actually my eldest daughter who was really sweet because I was playing with it. And she was like, she stopped like very serious. And she was like, do you want to be called Zev? I don't want to dead name you, which is, for people listening, dead naming is what happens to trans people. My older sister is trans, and that they pick their new name, but people still use the old name. It's a dead name. And so she asked me that question. It was like this moment of truth. Like, do I want to be Zev? And she asked it to me and I was like, I do. I want to be called Zev. And I just haven't looked back. And like, I'm still unwired.
Beautiful.
Like, I'm still like, I have email address. Like I'm still Aaron in most of my digital world. So I'm like slowly making the change.
Takes a long time.
So tell me your story. What was your name change?
I think my Macy's credit card is still under my old name. Well, when I was born, my middle name was Rose. And actually my full first name was Jory. It had an N at the end and I hated Jory.
Jory.
Yes. And I never went by it and I hated it. And when I was little, I wanted my name to be Jory Rose. And I used to tell myself, if I were ever famous one day, I want my name to be Jory Rose. And I'm like, I don't know what I'd be famous for, but I loved the sound of the name. And part of it was my ex-husband, Rose was part of his last name. So it was a longer name. So we used to joke in high school, like if he ever were to shorten his name, my name would be Jory Rose. Like so I find like when I got married and I come home with my new like social security card after, getting that piece of paper, I'm like, this is the stupidest name, like having Rose and then Rose also in my last name. So years go by and I ended up dropping my middle name as Rose and I took on my maiden name initial as a middle name. So anyhow, that was the kind of like iteration number one is my married life, right? And I was at, actually, you'll appreciate my very, very first Wisdom 2.0 conference. I met a guy who was basically like a little yunta. He just was a connector. And perhaps you even know him. His name is Brad Nye. And he connected me with the guy who built my first website. He connected me with the person who I spoke at my first conference I spoke at. But as I'm meeting him, this was years before I was divorced, he's putting my name into his phone. And he says to me, oh, I'm just going to put it in as Jory Rose, because when you get divorced one day, that's just who you're going to be. And my immediate reaction was like, fuck you. Who do you think you are? You don't even know me. My secondary thought, which was, holy shit, how did you just see right through me? So he introduces me to the guy who builds my website. And I'm having this first meeting with the website guy. And I already had a URL picked out. And we're sitting at a cafe up in Mill Valley. And he said, you know what, that's way too long of a URL. He goes, you know what? And he's looking on his phone and pulling up, I think, GoDaddy or something to see if the URL was available. He says, Jory Rose, that's just, and at the time, that was not my name. I still had my married name. And so, from that moment, my website has always been joryrose.com. So years go by, I get divorced, and I thought about changing it. And I'm like, my kids are too young. I don't really feel comfortable having a different last name than my kids. And even though it's kind of incorporated into their last name, and I've got 2 daughters, their names will likely change one day if, they get married. But I hadn't been there yet. And then John and I went to Paris. And before we left for Paris, I told myself, I want to find a piece of art to replace a painting that I had hung on the wall that was very much a part of my marriage. And I was intentional about wanting to replace this. And our second day in Paris, I come across this perfectly Parisian artist in his little teeny tiny, like 10 foot by 5 foot gallery. And he was brilliant. And I saw this piece and I thought about it for a couple of days and I'm like, I'm going to buy this. I came here saying I want to get this. And the day that I went to go back and pay for it, the credit card didn't work. So he says, go enjoy your day. I'll come to your hotel tonight and we'll exchange payment for it. When he came to my hotel that night, he brings me a long stem red rose. And he says, you know what, as we were talking, and he was very spiritual. And he said, as we were talking, I kept getting this image of a rose. And in fact, I'm going to customize this piece of art and put a rose somewhere on it to make it really more personal to you. And I was like, okay, universe, I hear you. And after I got home from Paris, it was only a few months before I turned 40. And I thought, all right, this is my gift to myself. And so the time I turned 40, I was finally Jory Rose. And I said to John, hey, if we ever get married, just so you know, not changing my name again. It took me 40 years to become Jory Rose. This is who I am. I really, asked my daughters kind of their permission. I don't want them to feel abandoned that I had a different name than them. And they really supported it. And it has felt amazing to be the name and to be the person finally at 40 years old that I always wanted to be.
What a beautiful story.
And always was in there. And, just these soulmates of people who dropped into my life and said, I see you, you're Jory Rose. I see you, you're Jory Rose. And people will, randomly compliment, like, oh, you got it, such a beautiful name. And I'm like, I know, like I created it. Like I got to embody this. But it was a 40-year journey of finally enacting it.
Wow. I just feel compelled to say, I see you, Jory Rose. We all see you. We all see you. Thank you. So yeah, that's a cool story. Down to the rose in Paris. That's a beautiful story. I love that.
Yeah.
And names are powerful, right? It's like, and it is about the shift. Like what I'm loving is like, I am in a totally new moment of my life. I just like came out of a 20-year relationship, the work I'm doing, I shut down my podcast. Like I'm being reborn. And so it is fun to be reborn into a new name because it allows everything to feel different. Like every time someone calls me Zev, I go, oh yeah, I'm that person, not the person who was sort of asleep at the wheel or the person who was afraid to share my truth. Zev is like, there's a fierceness to my life that I'm showing up for that gets embodied in the name.
I was just going to say it's an embodiment.
Mm-hmm.
It's an embodiment. And so many Hebrew names have, we choose those names on purpose. Both my daughters actually at one point want to get a tattoo of their Hebrew names because they so feel connected to the embodiment. One is ahava, which means love, and the other is simcha, which means joy. And it's such a beautiful embodiment. And it's like, yes, I fully support that of, embodying our inner true selves, and I think that's what this whole theme of this conversation has been, is how do we have the courage to embody our true self, even when it may have collateral impact that might hurt others because it's not what their expectations of us might have been, right? Like that's like ultimately the work right there.
And to own your goodness. Cause like to end this whole conversation, it's like, I would be lying if I didn't say I went through tremendous shame and sadness and like just feeling terrible about myself that I was carrying a truth that was going to impact other people. And like, that was the big healing for me when I found my goodness and all of that. I went, wait, this is just in me for whatever reason. Like this is the universe working its magic. And like, I just surrender and I trust and like, I'm good despite this feeling I have, or despite this knowing of what I need to do, that my goodness is actually not up for discussion. And people could still judge my choices, but it's like only we can know our own goodness. If we put our goodness in the hands of others, we're screwed, because then we're always going to be shape-shifting to get that goodness reflected on us. But if we know our own goodness, then watch out. You can have a really fun life because you'll choose what you want.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I think we just end right there. Great. I think that's it. Like, what else do we need to say?
And I just like knowing that Jory Rose is surrounded by love and joy. What else? Like now I get you. It's like,
yes. Thank you so much. What a beautiful conversation. I hope anyone listening or everyone listening, found at least one piece of acknowledgement of whatever you feel in that inner truth. Have the courage to speak it. It likely will never steer you wrong to enact that and then to embody that.
Yeah. And I would say it needs help to reach out to both of us, and you can find me on Instagram at Zev_Aaron. I'll be continuing to post lots of truth bombs and lots of things that support this narrative. So if it's interesting, please join in. Beautiful. Can't wait to hear from people. And also reach out to you if you want the good love. You're a tremendous therapist, and people should take you up on it and book a session immediately.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad.
And go to your retreats too. Yes. And go to your retreats. Your retreats look amazing, by the way.
Oh, I got to be there in 2 weeks from right now. Oh, I'm so excited to talk. I mean, it's embodied work, right? That's what retreats should all be about, is embodied work. And as I'm so happy after all these years that our paths still continue to cross, and may one day they cross in person.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see you and John together one day. I would love that.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Well, many continued blessings on your journey. Thank you so much for sharing an evening with me. I really appreciate it and value you sharing your truth.
Thank you. Now I got to go cook dinner for 2 hungry kids.
There you go. All right. Take care and be well, everyone.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.